Welcome to a series called The End of Times, where we're going through the book of Revelation verse by verse to see what it is we can expect to happen, but more importantly, what we should be doing in the end times, or the times Jesus refers to as the end of the age. I do want to make a note that we have started a new series called The End of the Age, where we're going through Matthew 24 and 25 to see exactly what Jesus had to say about the end times. But where we are in the book of Revelation is we have made it to chapter 16. I highly encourage you to take some time to go back and listen to those other episodes, because it's hard just to jump in, because we've gone through 7 seals, 7 trumpets, and now we're on the 7 bowls of the wrath of God that completes the wrath of God. There will be no more wrath from God for eternity after this. It also is the final plagues on the earth. There will be no more plagues after this as well. And it's in the form of 7 bowls from 7 angels. We made it to the 6th bowl, and we've spent several episodes on this because there is so much going on in this particular 5 verses. And many times people kind of blast through this, and there's some very notable moments in the 6th bowl, Armageddon being one of them. And a lot of times it's very misunderstood. I do believe that. So we're just going to pick it up where we left off. What has happened with this 6th bowl is the Euphrates River dried up to make way for the kings of the east. And then we see that the Antichrist, the beast, as well as the false prophet, have frogs coming out of their mouth, which are demons, and it clearly says that those are demons. So these are possessed. They're possessed. The Antichrist is possessed by Satan himself. And we're seeing that. We're seeing the visual of that. But then there's this pause where there's an important note where he says Jesus is coming like a thief, and we talked about that last episode. But where we're going to pick up is where we left off right there, chapter 16, verse 15. Behold, I am coming as a thief. Blessed is he who watches and keeps his garments, lest he walk naked and they see his shame. And we talked about that last week. And they gathered them together to the place called in Hebrew Armageddon. Now, we're going to dedicate this episode to what does it mean that they gathered them together to the place called in Hebrew Armageddon, because a lot of people refer to this as a battle, the Battle of Armageddon. Oftentimes the term Armageddon is just referred to as kind of an apocalyptic event. We're just going to make it crystal clear what this is, and most people that talk about Armageddon are probably wrong. So what Armageddon in Hebrew is it's the hills of Megiddo. We're talking about a city of Megiddo, and Megiddo is in northern Israel. And Megiddo has been brought up multiple times in the Bible. When Joshua conquered Israel, Megiddo played a role there. And whenever the land was divvied up in Judges, Megiddo played a role there. And Megiddo's played many roles throughout many historical moments in the Bible. But this is a prophetic moment. This is a moment where they're saying that the kings of the earth are gathered together at the hills of Megiddo. Now, I want to take some assumptions out of the equation real quick. A lot of people refer to Armageddon as a battle of Armageddon. So far, what we've seen is it just says he gathered them together. And what we've also seen in past episodes, that the final battle between Jesus and the world takes place in the Valley of Decision, or the Valley of Jehoshaphat, between the Mount of Olives and Jerusalem. So that's not what this is. What we see now is they're being gathered together. So we're just going to focus on gathering the kings to the hills of Megiddo. What exactly is this? And we're not going to use any commentary. We don't use commentary here on God, Family, and Guns. We just use the Word of God. So we're going to kind of jump to another place in Revelation, a few chapters ahead. Don't like to jump ahead, but in this case we're going to need to see this same moment. And this is at Christ's return. And it says specifically in Revelation 19:19. And I saw the beasts, the kings of the earth, and their armies gathered together to make war against him who sat on the horse and against his army. Now, we're going to get into what Christ's army looks like later, but in another episode. But essentially, they're gathered together. They're gathered together because what we've seen up until this point is we've seen millions of angels essentially killing a third of mankind. And that has a lot to do with why these armies are gathered there, biblically speaking. because they have to overthrow that might of these angels that are essentially just killing a third of mankind. But we see a prophecy of this. We're going to go to Daniel, because when Daniel talked to Nebuchadnezzar about his dream, he saw future empires. And this gathering of these kings, he saw this. We see the result of these gathering of these kings. If we go to Daniel, chapter 2, again, this is when Daniel is telling Nebuchadnezzar about his dream, and I highly recommend you take a look at our Daniel series as well. We'll put that link there. But we're just going to jump to Daniel 2, verse 44, where he's kind of explaining the end of what he saw in this statue, or 43. As you saw iron mixed with ceramic clay, they will be mingled with the seed of men, but they will not adhere to one another, just as iron does not mix with clay. And in the days of these kings, the God of heaven will set up a kingdom which shall never be destroyed. And the kingdom shall not be left to other people. It shall break in pieces and consume all these kingdoms. And it shall stand forever. So ultimately what Daniel's seeing is he's seeing Christ's second coming. He's seeing the point where heaven is going to be established on earth, or the kingdom of heaven is going to be established on earth as it is in heaven. And he's seeing this moment, he's seeing the gathering of these kings, a lot of weak kingdoms and a lot of strong kingdoms mixed together is ultimately what he's seeing. And these kingdoms are gathered to come against him and his army, and they gather them together at the hills of Megiddo. Now we're going to jump to Zechariah, because there's some things that take place that we can assume in Armageddon. We know that the angels have been unleashed to kill a third of mankind, and we know that the world's army are up against that, because Babylon is getting destroyed, a third of the earth is darkened, the rest of the earth gets darkened, and then all of a sudden a third of the earth is getting killed by angels. So clearly this is going to cause the world to gather together against the forces of God. And in Zechariah specifically addresses this moment too, but he says something peculiar about Megiddo, and I've never really heard anybody compare this moment of Armageddon to this passage in Zechariah. But we're going to jump to Zechariah, and in Zechariah 12, he's talking specifically about the pierced one returning. I don't think we need to make any assumptions. That's clearly Jesus Christ returning. And we're going to go to Zechariah 12, starting in verse 10. And I will pour on the house of David and on the inhabitants of Jerusalem the spirit of grace and supplication. Then they will look on me, whom they have pierced. They will mourn for him as one mourns for his only son, and grieve for him as one grieves for a firstborn. In that day there shall be a great mourning in Jerusalem, like the mourning at Hadad Raman in the plains of Megiddo. Now, there's a lot of misunderstanding about what this mourning at Hadad Raman in the plain of Megiddo means, but there's some clear mention of what's going on here. Clearly there's going to be some mourning going on in the plains of Megiddo, and there's clearly going to be mourning going on in Jerusalem, like the mourning that took place in Megiddo. My guess is it's going to be pretty brutal in both these places. We've really looked closely at what takes place in the Valley of Decision, and I'm going to put that link here. It's the wine press of the fierceness of God. It doesn't go well for mankind. But Megiddo, there's really a lot of assumptions, and that's about it. All we can say is that they gather. Now, Hadad Raman is a really interesting thing to study out as well, and we may dedicate the next episode to that. Raman is a place, and if you actually look up the word here, it just says Raman. If you actually look up the Greek word that's written in, or the Hebrew word that's written in Zechariah 12, it does not say Hadad Raman, it just says Raman. So I don't know what that insert is, and I just don't know enough about ancient Hebrew to tell you that. But with that note, there's no mention of Hadad Raman in the Bible. There's a lot of mention of Raman, which is a city. But Hadad, there's just a lot of assumptions. A lot of people refer to it as some sort of false god. But again, those are just assumptions. And I do have several passages on Hadad Rahman, and we'll probably dedicate the next episode to that specifically because we're talking about Armageddon at this point. But what we're seeing in Zechariah is ultimately a mourning that's taking place. There's some sort of mourning that's going to take place at Megiddo, and then it's going to be similar to what the mourning that's going to take place in Jerusalem. And my guess is going to be, it's definitely going to be a bloodbath in Jerusalem, and it's probably going to be a bloodbath at Megiddo. Now, there's some people that will say that, because if you look at the history of Megiddo, in Kings, 1st and 2nd Kings, there's a king who died there, and he was the last hope really for Israel at the time, and there was a lot of mourning. It could be that they're referring to that moment, because that's a biblical moment where there was a lot of mourning going on in Megiddo, and they're saying now Jerusalem's going to be like that. So those are the two things that this particular Zechariah could mean. And again, we'll take the next episode and focus on Hadad Rahman. But ultimately, what we know for sure is that the kings of the earth are going to be gathered at the hills of Megiddo. We know that for sure. And they are gathered together specifically to go against Jesus Christ and his armies. That we know. And we also know that when they come up against him in the Valley of Decision, or the Valley of Jehoshaphat, that it is really a terrible, again, it's referred to as the winepress of the fierceness of God. And it just, they essentially melt, they dissolve is the way the Bible describes it. And my guess is the way angels kill Megiddo is not going to be that prettier. So we're just going to read those passages again, just kind of jumping back to Revelation. I'm going to bring all passages together at this point. Revelation 16, starting in 12. Then the sixth angel poured out his bowl on the great river Euphrates, and its water was dried up, so that the way of the kings from the east might be prepared. And I saw 3 unclean spirits like frogs coming out of the mouth of the dragon, out of the mouth of the beast, and out of the mouth of the false prophet. For they are spirits of demons, performing signs which go out to the kings of the earth and of the whole world to gather them to the battle of that great day of God Almighty. Behold, I am coming as a thief. Blessed is he who watches and keeps his garments, lest he walk naked and they see his shame. And they gathered them together to the place called in Hebrew Armageddon. So we're going to dedicate the next episode to really kind of focusing on what it is Zechariah is saying about this moment as best we can as we enter into the 7th bowl of the wrath of God. And as we get done with that, we're going to get into, for the next couple chapters, Babylon. And a lot of people have commented, they've been kind of wondering what I think is Babylon, and this is kind of where in those moments we're going to really discuss Babylon in great detail for 2 chapters. Probably have about 4 or 5 months on Babylon. So love to hear your comments on Armageddon. Put them below. If you like this video, click like and subscribe. Feel called to support this channel through Patreon. That link is also below. But the most important part of this channel is we take prayer requests, so never hesitate to send that in. Thank you for watching this episode of God, Family, and Guns. And as always, love God, love your family, and love guns.